Paul Gurk was a German writer and poet, born in 1880 in Frankfurt an der Oder. Following the death of his father, he was raised by an uncle. He attended a Realschule, but had to end his studies prematurely. He was employed as an official in various divisions of the city administration of Berlin, and was pensioned off in 1934. Gurk began writing in 1912. His novel Thomas Münzer, the 16th century theologian and leader of the German peasant uprising of 1525, won the Kleist Prize. His 1934 Berlin tells the story of book salesman Eckenpen and his demise in a metropolis that has no more place for books and booksellers. Upon his death in 1953 in Berlin, over 600 watercolors depicting the Berlin countryside were discovered in his backyard tenement. Today we will review his 1935 Tuzub 37. Tuzub 37, The Myth of the Grey Mankind, or the Number One, is a science fantasy. Beginning in the distant future, mankind had turned itself into a grey uniform mass, working endlessly for work's sake. Everything is regulated, people no longer have names, and everything is devoted solely to progress. Humans are semi-roboticized, and their chief effort is to roboticize themselves even further. Experiments are now done to make them no longer need to grow up, eat, and get rid of sleep entirely, which now is only a 2-hour forced unconsciousness. At the same time, progress requires them to maximize the utility of the planet, demolishing mountains and drying up the ocean to build high-rise cities and personal train tracks. There are gatherings where people vote, but because thinking is forbidden, all decisions are unanimous. Unbeknownst to the population, the world is secretly run by the 9 great scribes, who order changes to the almighty protocol, and decide what further goals are needed to turn human machines into machine machines. Among the 9 are brain, ear, eye, etc., and down to stomach, and they spend their days trying to make themselves unneeded so they can launch themselves into space never to return. At the beginning there is still a sort of history in the form of the prison of the last living beings, where an old lion, a bush, a tree, and a stream all talk to each other about the terrible nature of the grey people, who can take away their voice by the press of a button. Soon 2 greys are found who dare to stop working and even engage in thought. The last living poet and the last living philosopher. They are imprisoned with the last living beings, brain wishing to have them to engage in a word battle at the next grey assembly, and then to exterminate them anyway. But they don't live to see the day, and the prison itself begins to fall apart, so that only the spring remains. But even the spring loses its voice when its water disappears underground, and is replaced by artificial water that does not speak. In between these stages along the road to progress, we have conversations between the earth and the ocean, or the ocean and the sky concerning the greys. Then when the grey wish to level the Himalayas, we see the desperate battle fought against them by the wind demons who live there. Things go on well enough, but then Brain decides he is no longer needed, and ejects himself into space. Now the chief voice lies with Stomach, and it is because of him that the final disaster is not overcome. Initially, nature begins to fight back by unleashing a horde of many-winged giant worms in the faces of children raining down upon the fields, but most of them are cut into pieces by the giant net they have arranged in the sky so that the sun would not be needed and there never need be any night. But then comes the air sickness, caused by the pollution from the metal. Fully mechanical beings, the grey develop for uninterrupted labor. A giant tower is to be built above the highest heaven to try and suck up the pollution, but the metal men go crazy and demand a soul, before tearing the greys and each other into pieces, as Rennu, the last truly living man, is beaten to death by his comrades. The story is extremely engaging, the only problem is that at times it goes on for a bit too long.